All right. For the audience that doesn't know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, Brennan Long.
So, what is it that you do?
Okay, well, so currently I'm the head of law enforcement relations for Anchain.ai, which is a Web3 cryptocurrency company. And we specialize in tools, support, and monitoring of cryptocurrency investigations, and assist law enforcement across the globe with fraud, narcotics trafficking, CSAM, etc.
So, you also work for the FBI. And so, in your time of investigating cybercrime investigations and mainly cryptocurrency, which is really just a fancy way of saying money laundering through technology, usually. Um, what did you like? What are some of the cases that you've worked on, and a lot of the things that you've seen?
So let's see, going back to the late 90s, I started off with local law enforcement with the Phoenix Police Department, and kind of getting a bright shadow there. So sorry about that.
Looks like you're on the surface of the sun right now.
I promise Oppenheimer is not going on behind me. So
Yeah. I'm like, it looks like you're in heaven. Like
right.
down.
So I started off in the late 90s with the Phoenix Police Department and worked gangs and organized crime. And that was up to 9/11. After 9/11, I went over and I worked with a squad with, this was before the Joint Terrorism Task Force, but similar to what it is now, with a squad that was investigating money laundering having to do with some of the activity around Phoenix, which is related to 9/11. If you know anything about 9/11 and where the individual cells operated, one of the cells operated around Phoenix, Arizona, and went to training at Embry-Riddle University for aeronautics. Let's see. After that, I worked in Colorado for a while as a defense contractor, and worked counterintelligence for about 5 years there, different programs, and then over to the FBI. So I was with the FBI for 13 years in Chicago and in Cleveland, and worked a lot of programs there: counterterrorism, white collar investigations, gangs, violent crime, in both Chicago and Cleveland. And so in terms of cryptocurrency, so in money laundering, what I would say now is that cryptocurrency is touching on just about every criminal violation you can think of. From, obviously fraud, which is a big one, to narcotics trafficking, child exploitation, human trafficking, and even to, I'm sure you've heard of PPP loan fraud, even PPP loan fraud, because people are taking the assets that they acquire, the illicit assets, and dumping them into crypto.
So one thing I'm curious about is Monero. So Monero has been a very long-standing, I guess, it has become the currency for criminals, right? Usually.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's good people that use it, but most people that are using it are criminals. So it has a reputation of basically being untraceable. Now, is that true? Like, what are the problems with something like tracing something like Monero as compared to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so in terms of Monero is what you would consider a privacy coin, where Bitcoin is not. And Bitcoin, the ledger and things is public, and people want to openly see where transactions go. But when you look at Monero, it is purposefully designed to disguise where transactions go. Similar to a mixer, similar to, let's say, Tornado Cash. And I think you could relate those in the activity that takes place in that space. When you look at like Tornado Cash, what's the point of someone using Tornado Cash beyond the fact that they want to obfuscate where their funds are going? And what's the purpose for that? Well, obviously, if I'm trying to move illicit assets across the blockchain, then it's advantageous for me to use a system that makes it more difficult for someone like myself or in law enforcement to trace where those assets go. And so, yes, just like you mentioned, there's probably a legitimate purpose for that, and I'm sure there's legitimate transactions that take place there, but it's very inviting for illicit activity. I would also add to that something even more simple is like a Bitcoin ATM. Yeah, again, you're looking at, there are legitimate transactions through Bitcoin ATM, but it's also inviting for a criminal actor to use that. The fees associated with a Bitcoin ATM are usually quite high, as opposed to just using a normal ATM. So, or wire transfer, or so on. So there's all sorts of things that have been put in place, technology that has been invented to obfuscate funds, whether or not it's for legitimate or illegitimate purposes.
So when it came to some of the investigations that you've seen, like what are some of the more, what is the one case that you've worked on in the FBI and even now, more so in the FBI though, like when it comes to these cybercrime investigations, what is the one case that sticks out with you? Like in terms of how nefarious the individual was, or how complex the scheme was, or anything in between? Like what is the one case that sticks out for
Yeah, I would say the one case that sticks out the most for me, at least, I tend to focus on current investigations and things that have happened within the past 2 to 3 years. And Chain, as a company, specializes in smart contract investigations. And as the world shifts, and criminal actors included, shift from what I would consider a legacy coin, Bitcoin, to moving towards DeFi and the Ethereum blockchain, let's say. The backbone of that is smart contracts. And looking at that and the complex nature of smart contracts, I'm not a computer engineer by trade. And so I'm not used to looking at various levels of code and the lines and so on and so forth to really understand, just by reading it, where it's all going. And so we have designed tools that make it easier for an investigator or an analyst to go in there and pull that information out, put it into almost like a dashboard that breaks it all down so you can see where all those things are going. And so because of that availability of smart contracts, I think the more interesting and complex cases involve smart contracts and the exploitation of smart contracts. And so I would say the cases that we're seeing now, the really complex ones, like flash loan attacks against a smart contract, or the manipulation or exploitation of a smart contract, are extremely interesting. And also an area that a majority of even federal law enforcement doesn't have the expertise in. And so it's an area that, we're really trying to focus on, a gap that we're trying to focus on. So to me, when I look back through the interesting cases, I think these current ones are even more interesting than just we seized assets in a Bitcoin wallet. I think that there are obviously, investigations from the past that involve the seizure of Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on, but aren't at the level of sophistication that we're seeing now.
So, what is the difference between the private work that you are now doing versus working in the FBI?
So on the private sector side, the one area is you don't have the one obstacle. You don't have access to the same avenues of information that you do when you're in law enforcement. You know, you don't have subpoena power as a private company that you would as, you know, within the FBI. You don't have the ability to submit those court orders or process court orders to an exchange, a cryptocurrency exchange. So that's an obstacle as you come from law enforcement into the private sector. But you know, we still support law enforcement. We still work investigations at local, county, state level. We have contracts with the federal government, federal law enforcement to work cases with them. And I do think that more so than what I've ever experienced in the past is starting to see the private sector side used more often in investigations than, you know, I compare it to when I started in law enforcement 25 years ago. We didn't have to have private sector engagement come in and help us with investigations. But that is the case now. I mean, some of these things are so sophisticated that the federal government doesn't have the knowledge base to conduct those investigations on their own. So they're reaching out to the private sector more and more to bring in those software engineers, network security folks that have those background that aren't in the federal government already. They're bringing them in on investigations to assist with those.
So, in your profile, your LinkedIn profile, which is how we met, you worked many cases both in cybercrime and white collar crimes, right? So, when it came to white collar criminal cases and cyber criminal cases, which are pretty similar in many ways, they're very hands off crimes in a lot of for the most part. They're not like a violent crime. So when we're talking about the personality traits or what you've learned about people that commit white collar crimes as compared to a violent crime, what are some of the differences in their character or the way that they act, if you have noticed anything?
Well, I do think that obviously one of the stark differences I would say is that, you know, when you compare violent crime to white collar crime or criminals, you know, the level of violence that one is able to move towards or conduct. So when you look at gangs and violent crime and terrorism, even, there's a level of, you know, violence that they're able to move towards and execute, where most of your white collar criminals obviously aren't meant or don't move to that extreme. But I would say that both you know, share the mentality of fraud, share the mentality of a criminal mind in knowing that what you're doing is a crime and still committing it, right? So, you know, society tends to look at white collar criminals as, you know, how do I put this? Not as malicious, if you will, because it's not violent. But you look at the past, you know, the white collar criminals that have scammed people in Ponzi schemes that defraud people of their life savings. It's just as malicious. It may not be as violent, right? But it's still a criminal mind. It's still someone that knows that what they're doing is illegal.
what do you think you've learned about about if there was one thing that you could say that you've learned about all the people that you've ever investigated and all the criminal cases you've ever dealt with in the private and public sector, if you could say there's one thing that you've learned about people in general, uh, a moral, a value that you gained from it, what would you say that you've learned or realized after going through it all?
People in general, or boy, I think that most people think that when they commit a crime, let's take it to the extreme. Um, if you are for or against capital punishment, right? And capital punishment is obviously something that is the highest level of enforcement and punishment. And most of it is for killing someone, right? Do you think someone thinks about when they murder someone else that I could face capital punishment for this? And I think that mentality comes all the way through from that far extreme all the way to somebody who's just shoplifting in, a candy bar. Do you ever think you might get caught and what the circumstances are going to be? And so I think that is something that I have learned being exposed to law enforcement over the past 25 plus years is I don't think people think about the punishment before they conduct the activity. They just conduct the activity. And I think that is regardless of what the crime is. So I don't think people necessarily consider the punishment, nor do I think that the punishment might be necessarily a deterrence to crime. Um, I think that most people who are driven to conduct crime are just going to do it without, really considering all the factors involved in it.
Has there ever been anybody that you've put away that you were happy to put away?
Yeah, and again, I think when you talk about white collar crime and cyber crime, it tends to be not violent, right? Unless you're tying it back to something on the other end that is funding terrorism, let's say. But I remember a case when I was with the Phoenix Police Department of a group of individuals that raped a 12-year-old for about 14 hours in an abandoned house. And they basically kidnapped her. They held her in this house. They conducted that activity there. And then they basically left her like she was trash. And when that victim came back several years later, she moved out of state. She came back several years later to testify. We picked her up on a Sunday, her and her parents, from the airport, and we brought them right away to the courtroom so she could sit on the stand because she had to testify. And so she got used to it. And those photographs of that evidence were being displayed behind her, and she had to relive that as she told that story and testified. And it's really excruciating to see someone go through that. And so when that case finally went to trial, and by that time, the 12 individuals that had conducted that rape, half of them had already been put away on other crimes. But the 6 that were still remaining that sat in that courtroom really didn't come across as having much of a remorse. And so to see the end result of that, to see, prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these individuals had conducted this crime, to have them sit there and, walk through and go through this trial and then ultimately get convicted, I think is satisfying to see that justice was served. That's one compelling case that comes to mind. Having worked terrorism cases in the counterterrorism program in Chicago, and in doing the investigation and then seeing the ultimate result of whether terrorists overseas were arrested and taken down. I think that there's a level of satisfaction there because you know that they're extreme actors. Those are the most compelling cases that come to mind for me, that I see are the most rewarding. But there's various levels. Obviously, if you got a white collar, complex financial investigation and you're able to, prove again beyond a reasonable doubt that someone had scammed someone else, and able to finally recover some of those assets and give them back to the victims, that's also rewarding.
Do you think that what do you think the most effective method of gathering intelligence that you've seen? Because I know you also did some work in the Navy, and a big part of your job in the FBI was developing intelligence gathering techniques. So, what's the key to gathering intel? What's the key to gathering intel, and the most effective one that you've figured out to gather intelligence on subject matters?
Sure. So I guess I'm kind of old school. When I started in law enforcement and even in the military, it was in the 1990s. And so a lot of this technology wasn't around. The internet was just starting to be used more often. We were starting to use email and that sort of thing. And you look at some of the advancements in signals intelligence and imagery intelligence and collection efforts and so on. I think it's unbelievable what we can collect on now. But I still think that nothing beats human interaction. Nothing beats sitting in front of someone and asking them questions, collecting information from them. There's one when I was doing my master's program in intelligence, one thing that really stuck out to me is I remember reading that human intelligence and human, as you would call it, is the only collection discipline that you can really decipher intent. And by saying that is you can see the interaction with the other individual. You can, read their body language and really derive intent from that. Whereas if you're collecting signals intelligence, let's say listening to a wiretap or something like that, you can hear the conversation, but you can't see the emotion and you can't see how somebody reacts most times. So I still think human intelligence is probably the best collection method.
Do you have any? Was there ever anybody that you put away that you felt bad for?
Um, I think that over time, I did probably gain a better understanding of people's circumstances and where those circumstances may have driven them or pushed them to criminal activity. So from that aspect, I think over my time in law enforcement, I may have gained compassion, being exposed to people that are less fortunate than myself. And so in that aspect, I guess, I could feel bad for them. If you have a tough upbringing, you come up in a tough family situation, drugs, violence, maybe only one parent or no parent in the situation. I think that it's difficult to get out of that and to break that cycle. So I can see, I do have compassion for that. I don't have compassion for someone who grows up in that environment and then conducts violence on someone else. But I can see, especially when you talk about let's say, inner city violence, I can see where it's difficult for some people, that they have a more difficult life than others.
If you had to put down, and this is similar to the lessons that you've learned question, what, if you had to put down, would be some advice that you would give somebody when it comes to talking to people, when it comes to how, what's the most important thing you've learned when it comes to how to dealing with people and how to talk to people?
In terms of collecting information, or in terms of interviewing for a crime? What?
Both.
Both. Um, I think that, in order to be a good investigator, a good analyst, and in interaction with people, I think that you have to develop your listening skills. And most people, especially if they're in a troubled situation, will want to release that, vent that information. And so you have to approach that as someone who's there to listen to what their story is. Um, and I think that that's a skill set that you have to practice. I know that, you can go to any law enforcement academy, detective school, FBI academy, DEA, whatever it is, and they take you maybe beyond that. You go to an advanced interview techniques training certification, or even as an interrogator in the military. I think that most people want to tell their story. And I think that that's the approach that I have learned is, you have to approach it from that mindset, and that you want to listen to the individual. And I'll give you an example of that, that is very publicized. So way back when, again, when I started working with the FBI right after 9/11, our squad agent was an agent. His name is George Piro. And George Piro at that time I think he had 2 or 3 years in the FBI, maybe 4. But George Piro went on through different levels and things throughout the FBI. And he ended up being the individual that interviewed Saddam Hussein before he was executed. And when you read about that, you see that George's approach to that was, I want to hear his story. I want to hear his background and his perception of what took place, and his history. And I think George gained a level of respect from Saddam Hussein that helped, not necessarily from a friendly perspective. I don't think George was trying to become friends with him, but gained a level of respect where Saddam Hussein felt free to share information that, if you had taken it from an extreme angle and from an extreme interrogation approach, torturing someone, etc., you likely wouldn't have gained that level of information that he did. And so I think, if you're interested in that, look that up, George Piro, Piro. And it's an interesting approach. And I think that's a good example of the fact that you have to establish that rapport with somebody to gain that knowledge that you're looking for.
Are there any cases that you investigated that were ultimately unsuccessful? Basically, the getaways, right? The ones that got away.
So I think especially with the federal law enforcement, the FBI is the enforcement arm, the collection arm. It's not the arm that prosecutes. That's through the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so when you approach a U.S. attorney and discuss, or an assistant U.S. attorney and discuss cases that you want to open, and they agree to that, they will monitor that case as the collection comes in, the evidence comes in. They will monitor that case and meet with the FBI, the analysts, and the agents to discuss what has been collected and what can I prove in a court of law. And ultimately, if that AUSA isn't comfortable with that case and the evidence that's been collected, they cannot prosecute it, and they may very well say close the case. So you might have a case, and agents work a case for 8-10 years that never gets prosecuted. It's just the nature of the beast, but it's also very frustrating because there are people that are getting away with things that you'll never be able to prosecute, and so you just have to move on to the next case. So I think that's a frustration that any law enforcement agency is going to have in investigating cases, is whether or not they can successfully prosecute them.
So I'm going to end the interview like kind of shortly after this question. Stop the record, talk a little bit after the show, but what advice would you give to anybody listening to this interview?
In terms of a career?
Just anything. I mean, or if you want to be more specific, what advice would you give to young people?
Sure. So I think that if you have a passion for something, I think most people tend to haphazardly pursue that. But if you have a passion for something, and obviously law enforcement's an easy one for me to discuss. If you have a passion for law enforcement and you want to get into law enforcement, build on the path to get there and seek it out. Seek out opportunities. Because people quickly notice when you seek out opportunities to build upon your knowledge, seek out opportunities to build upon a career path, and you quickly start to stand out that someone that has that drive to get things done. And I think that's with anything. If you sit back and just wait for that opportunity to possibly come across, it never will. Or in an extreme case, it might. But more often than not, you have to seek it out. You have to build a path, and you have to go out and obtain it. And I say that from a law enforcement career, a military career. Things don't necessarily come and just fall into your lap. You have to seek it out.
All right. I think that's a good place to end off. All right. Any
Okay.
final words from the audience?
No final words that I know of.
All right. Fair enough. All right. In 3, 2, 1.